Hello, music fans. Here are 9 metal, rock, and prog albums that came out over the last week that you might be interested in my order of preference, starting with Thy Catafalque and their album, which I dare not try to pronounce, that came out on November 15th. It's subtitled the Roman numeral 12, and then I assume it's some Hungarian words, because they're a band from Hungary. They're avant-garde progressive black metal with post-metal, death metal, symphonic and experimental rock influences, even some electronic and folk in there. Lots of cool sounds. This is their 12th album, and I'm putting this in my excellent tier. I thought their last album, Halfold, was also excellent. It was all over the place. It's black metal at its core, with mostly black metal shrieking vocals, but there were some clean vocal sections, some sections that almost sounded like dance music. There was a flute in some parts on their last album and violin in other parts. All in all, it was a wild adventure to listen to, and I was hoping this album would be as much of a wild adventure, and luckily it was. The main difference here is that from the last album is I think there's even more clean vocals and melody on this newest album, but there's still a lot of intensity and variety. Some parts sound like Middle Eastern music, some parts sound like electronic music, some parts like intense metal, but it's all enjoyable and really well done. So if that sounds good to you, check out the Catafalque. Definitely if you're a fan of Dodd Heimsgard or Enslaved, I think those are some similar bands that if you like them, you'll probably like this. Next up is another really interesting one by Joey Frevola, and it's called Art Supplies and Pain. This one I couldn't find on Spotify, but I found it on Bandcamp. It's the second album by this American artist. It's progressive metal. It's got some kind of a progressive metal rock opera, got a lot of art rock, folk, and classical influences in there too. I'm putting this one in my excellent tier as well, and big thanks to Christian for the recommendation of this one in our group chat. This is the second album by this film composer and guitarist Joey Frevola. He began writing music at the age of 12. He formed a progressive metal band called Edge of Reality during high school in his hometown of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And after studying composition at Belmont University, he began writing and performing with UK-based progressive rock band Kairos in 2014, and they also released a great album this year. And in January 2019, he released his first solo record, Gone, which I've since gone back to listen to because I was curious because this second album is so good. And on this new album, Art Supplies and Pain, it very much picks up where his last solo album, Gone, left off. There's so much variety and experimentation on here. There's classical bits, opera-style vocals, male and female vocals. There's progressive metal, there's jazz and classic 70s prog rock, as well as art rock and folk. It sounds like a ADHD prog metal rock opera, like Arion meets Mr. Bungle, but also for fans of Devin Townsend and an Endless Sporadic. His Bandcamp says he plays with an Endless Sporadic, so that makes sense. The track Sparta I thought was actually a hilarious and fun song. It's an opera duet with male and female vocals over prog metal music, and it sounds like it's about trying to follow some directions when putting together furniture with your spouse, like IKEA directions or something where there's only pictures and no text. I thought that was fun, and in general, lots of the lyrics on this are very silly but fun when you listen to them. It keeps the vibe of the album lighthearted and quirky and funny while you're listening to it, while also just the music being wild and wacky and excellently composed and performed. So if that sounds good to you, check out Joey Frivola and Art Supplies and Pain. Next up, those were my 2 excellent tier albums. Now we're getting to just my very good, not quite at the excellent level, but still very good. We've got Perfect Storm and their album Stairs that came out November 14th. This is the second album by this Dutch band. It's kind of neo-progressive rock with alternative, ambient, and maybe a little bit of metal influence. There's both male and female vocals on this one by Perfect Storm. Some of the male vocals remind me of Ross Jennings from Haken a bit, which is great because I love Ross Jennings and Haken. The music's not as heavy as Haken, but there are some moments with some crunchy guitars that border on metal but never quite get there. So if you want more of a progressive rock that flirts with metal, alternative, ambient, and has male and female vocals and is just well performed, definitely check out Perfect Storm and their album Stairs. Next up, fourth on my list for this past week is As I Lay Dying with their album Through Storms Ahead that came out November 15th. This is the 8th album by this American melodic metalcore band. There's a bit of thrash metal influence in here, but it's mostly melodic metalcore. And there's been some recent drama in this band where 4 of the 5 members of the band left in October, just leaving Tim Lambesis as the only member. And if you don't know Tim's past history, he infamously tried to hire a hitman to kill his ex-wife. He served his time for that. Now the other members of the band, even after knowing that he's done that, they're saying now they need to distance themselves from the band and it wasn't a safe environment. So I'm not sure exactly what happened with the band, but it sounds really bad, whatever is going on between the members and Tim is trying to downplay it as just creative or financial disagreements. But despite all that drama, I don't know what's happening, but it seems bad. It seems like the band members are kind of crumbling. However, the music that they made before all of this drama unfolded is great metalcore music. I was interested in hearing it, even though this may be the end of the band unless Tim can find new people to replace everyone who left. He says he wants to do that. The music on this album is just classic sounding metalcore in the style of mid-2000s, but with modern production values. The clean choruses are catchy, the riffs are intense, the scream breakdowns make you want to mosh just as you'd expect from them. And fans of this band will likely enjoy the music on here, but not enjoy the drama that went on between the members. Next up, I want to talk about Poppy and her album Negative Spaces. This is the 6th album by this American artist. It's alternative metal with some electronic and pop rock and industrial influences. Over the course of Poppy's music career, she's done some albums that are bubblegum pop, some that are intense alternative metal with harsh vocals. And from the singles, I could tell this would be more of the latter, more of a metal release, but it also has undeniably catchy pop hooks as well. There's a great mix of clean vocals and harsh vocals on here. I think it's my favorite album from Poppy so far, so I'm also putting this one in my very good tier. And then also on the same day, Veilburner released an album called The Duality of Decapitation and Wisdom, the 7th album by this American band. And this is avant-garde, dissonant, technical blackened death metal with some doom, experimental, grindcore, industrial noise, and prog metal influences. I'm also putting this in my very good tier. And I've never heard anything by this band before, but this was one that Christian also recommended in our group chat, so thanks for that recommendation. And it's one of the most brutal and intense albums I've heard all year. If you're a fan of Ad Nauseum, Enslaved, and Dod Heimsgard, I think you should check this out. It's like a mix of those bands, but it's very dissonant. It's not easy to listen to. It's a bit too intense for me, to be honest, to listen to it often, but it seems like something that could be appealing when I'm in the mood for something really intense with brutality. If you want a very avant-garde, dissonant, technical, intense blast of brutality, then check out Veilburner and their album The Duality of Decapitation and Wisdom. Next up is Chelsea Wolfe with Unbound. This is an EP, and it's kind of folk rock, acoustic folk rock. There's that gothic, experimental, some doom metal undertones to it. I'm putting this one in my good tier. Didn't quite make very good for me. This is just an EP. She's a great American singer-songwriter, Chelsea Wolfe, and she makes music in many different styles. In this one, I heard the single Place in the Sun before the EP came out. It's a truly beautiful piano ballad reminiscent of My Immortal by Evanescence. So this EP contains 4 tracks from her album from earlier this year, reworked into these kind of acoustic folk song arrangements. And then the last track, Cellar Door, is a Spirit Box cover. So the whole EP is just well done, beautiful, but it lacks the variety and intensity that a full-length album from Chelsea Wolfe would typically bring. So it's not necessarily essential listening, but it's a nice companion piece to her album from earlier this year if you just want to hear a handful of those tracks done acoustic, which was, I thought, interesting, good to listen to. Probably not essential, though. Next up is Linkin Park with their album From Zero. This is the 8th album by this American band. It's alternative rock with some metal, rap, pop, and electronic influences. And I'm putting this in my good tier as well. They're just a massive band, so this is probably the most popular release I'm talking about this week by far. Their first after the passing of their frontman Chester Bennington, and the first to feature their new lead vocalist Emily Armstrong. The new singles I heard ahead of the release were okay. I wasn't sure how I felt about the replacement vocalist, Emily Armstrong. She can sing well, of course, but I'm not sure if she fits the memory of Linkin Park. I'm only really a fan of the first 2 Linkin Park albums anyway, to be honest, and then they kind of lost me. But I checked this album out because I'm a big fan of their first 2 albums. I enjoy them so much, so I wanted to hear if they can recapture some of that spirit. There are some tracks on here that are reminiscent of tracks on their first 2 albums. There was a track that reminded me of Faint called Heavy as the Crown. Another one that reminded me of One Step Closer called Two-Face. And everything on the album is good and fine, but nothing quite captures the magic that I feel they had on their first 2 albums, or really excites me to the point where I want to keep listening to this. So that for that reason, I just put this in my good tier. And the last album that I'm going to talk about in this video is another EP rather than a full length. And this is music by the band Underoath, and it's called Underoath Lo-Fi. This is an instrumental ambient electronic EP. And I'm putting this one in my average tier. It not quite good enough to call good, but this is an EP made by the lo-fi producer Less Gravity, and it pays tribute to the great metalcore band Underoath and their album, in particular their album They're Only Chasing Safety. The band has given this EP their backing. It's chilled out instrumental ambient electronic lo-fi version of 5 of the songs from They're Only Chasing Safety. And I just checked it out because I'm a fan of Underoath. I'm a fan of the original album, They're Only Chasing Safety. And these lo-fi versions are okay, but not really my style. I much prefer listening to the original versions of these songs. But maybe if you're a huge Underoath fan and you want some electronic lo-fi stuff on without any lyrics, and you just want to hear kind of those familiar chord progressions and melodies that Underoath wrote on that album, then it's worth checking out if you're in that category. If you're anyone else, if you're not like a big fan of and if you don't have a lot of nostalgia for the album They're Only Chasing Safety, then this is probably just going to sound like kind of boring instrumental ambient electronic music. With the melodies are good, of course, but there's tons of music out there that sounds like this, and it's just not that exciting for me, so I'm probably not going to return to it. And that's it for my first impressions on these 9 albums that came out over the last week. Have you heard any of these? Let me know what you think of them down in the comments. And is there anything else that came out recently that you think I might enjoy? Also let me know. And hit that subscribe button if you want to stay in the loop on what I'm listening to and my first impressions on them. In about a week's time, I will talk about new releases from Opeth, Bedsore. Oh no, Opeth is coming out November 22nd. Bedsore, I think, is November 29th. So really, Opeth is the big one that I'm really looking forward to. Maybe I'll do like a full-length review. I might also be listening to the new Judas Priest Rock'n'Rolla 50th anniversary. I don't know if I'll talk about it because it's more of a remix, remaster, but maybe I'll just give it a little, just give my brief thoughts on it. But really the big one that I'm going to be talking about in a week is Opeth, The Last Will and Testament. And I'm super excited for that one. I love Opeth It's probably one of my most anticipated albums of the entire year. So hit that subscribe button if you want to see my thoughts on that, and stay tuned for that. Peace out.